Few musicals have ever felt as warm, as timeless, or as effortless as Fiddler on the Roof. But behind every joyful melody and heartfelt moment was a production pushed to its absolute limits. Freezing locations, quiet personal tragedies, and bold creative gambles that could have easily destroyed everything came together in ways nobody expected. This video uncovers secrets hidden for decades behind one of cinema's most beloved films. And it all starts with a casting battle so fierce, it nearly tore the entire project apart before a single frame was ever shot. Number 1. The Tevye casting war. Landing the lead role in the film adaptation was never going to be simple. Zero Mostel had originated Tevye on Broadway and made the character iconic, so naturally, most people assumed he would reprise the role on screen. But director Norman Jewison had other ideas. He felt Mostel's larger-than-life persona, while perfect for the stage, would cause audiences to see the actor instead of the character. It was a bold stance that immediately created tension. Once word spread that the part was open, Hollywood came running. Walter Matthau, Danny Kaye, Rod Steiger, Richard Burton, and even Marlon Brando were all considered or actively pursued the role. The pressure on Jewison to cast a major star was enormous, and the studio had every reason to push for a proven box office name to anchor such an expensive production. But Jewison refused to bend. He was determined to find someone who felt authentic rather than famous, someone who could disappear into the world of a poor Jewish milkman in early 20th century Russia. That conviction put him on a collision course with the industry, and it led him across the Atlantic to a performance that would change everything. Number 2. One London show changed everything. There was no dramatic audition, no intense screen test, and no last-minute callback. The moment that decided who would play Tevye happened during a regular evening performance at Her Majesty's Theatre in London. Norman Jewison, having rejected every major Hollywood name, flew across the Atlantic to watch Topol perform in the West End production of the stage musical. Topol had already played Tevye hundreds of times by then, first in Tel Aviv and later in London, where he had become deeply connected to the character. His interpretation was strikingly different from Mostel's. Where Mostel had leaned into broad humor and theatrical energy, Topol brought quiet dignity and restrained warmth. He played a man who knew exactly who he was, and that grounded quality was exactly what Jewison had been searching for. By the time the curtain came down, Jewison was certain he didn't need another audition or a second opinion. Watching Topol perform in a routine show without any special preparation or awareness that the director was even in the audience convinced him completely. The long, exhausting search for Tevye was finally over, and the film had found its heart. Number 3. A director ready to quit Hollywood. By the late 1960s, one of Hollywood's most successful directors was quietly falling apart. Norman Jewison had delivered hit after hit, including In the Heat of the Night and The Thomas Crown Affair. But the political chaos and social upheaval in America were taking a deep personal toll. The assassinations, the unrest, and the growing tension left him profoundly disillusioned with the country he had been working in for years. After completing the period comedy Gaily Gaily in 1969, Jewison made a drastic decision. He packed up his family and moved to England, distancing himself from the Hollywood machine entirely. He later admitted he was spiritually despondent and seriously considering walking away from directing altogether. The passion that had driven his career was fading fast. Then came an unexpected call. United Artists approached him with an offer to direct the film version of the beloved stage musical. At first, the idea seemed unlikely, but the story of tradition, family, and resilience spoke to something deeply personal inside him. What began as a professional assignment quickly became an emotional lifeline, pulling him back from the edge of retirement and giving him a project that would reshape his entire outlook on life. Number 4. The matchmaker who needed whiskey. Filming on location in Yugoslavia meant dealing with conditions no Hollywood backlot could ever prepare anyone for. The shoot stretched through brutal winter months, and while the cameras needed cold weather to sell the story, the cast and crew paid a real physical price for every single frame. Nights were especially punishing, with temperatures dropping low enough to make even basic movement difficult. Nobody felt it more than Molly Picon, the beloved Yiddish theater star cast as Yente the matchmaker. Picon was already in her 70s when she took the role, and the freezing night scenes pushed her to the limit. In a letter to a friend, she described buying long johns and extra sweaters just to survive the outdoor shoots, layering everything she could find underneath her costume. But her most memorable coping strategy was far simpler. Picon admitted to carrying a small flask of whiskey with her during the coldest scenes, taking quiet sips between takes to keep herself warm. It was a humorous detail that revealed just how demanding the production truly was. Behind the cheerful energy she brought to Yente on screen, there was a veteran performer enduring genuinely harsh conditions with grit, humor, and a little liquid courage. Number 5. Anatevka was built from nothing. Creating the fictional village of Anatevka required far more than finding a scenic location and pointing the cameras. The production team needed a setting that looked and felt like an early 20th century Jewish settlement in Imperial Russia, and nothing they scouted came close to matching that vision. So they built it themselves, piecing together an entire world from scratch across multiple sites near Zagreb, Yugoslavia. 3 separate villages were used to bring Anatevka to life. One was left largely untouched, its existing structures close enough to the right period. A second had its houses carefully modified with salvaged wood from the correct era to add authenticity. The third was the most ambitious of all. There, the crew constructed both a synagogue and a full marketplace, complete with stalls, signage, and weathered details designed to look decades old. The results were so convincing that they fooled people who actually lived nearby. According to production accounts, a local villager wandered onto the set and genuinely tried to buy a horse from the marketplace, believing it was a real trading area. That level of realism didn't happen by accident. It took months of careful research, construction, and meticulous design work to build a world that no longer existed anywhere on Earth. Number 6. Underwear no one was meant to see. Authenticity on this production didn't stop at what the camera could see. The costume department, led by designers Joan Bridge and Elizabeth Haffenden, insisted that every piece of clothing be historically accurate, including garments that would never appear on screen. When the script called for a clothesline scene during Matchmaker, the team realized they had no reference for the undergarments worn by Jewish women in 1890s Russia. The solution came from film researcher Lillian Michelson, who served as the production's unofficial historian. With no photographs of the era's underclothing available, she took matters into her own hands. She traveled to a Jewish neighborhood in Los Angeles, sat on a bench, and began asking elderly women who had grown up in similar Eastern European villages about the clothing they once wore beneath their dresses. One woman was so eager to help that she hurried back to her apartment and returned with a hand-cut pattern for knee-length bloomers, complete with delicate scalloped edges that had to be sewn by hand. That single pattern became the basis for the garment seen hanging on the clothesline in the film. It was a small detail most audiences would never think twice about, but it captured the level of obsessive dedication that defined the entire production's approach to visual storytelling. Number 7. How Tevye aged overnight. One of the film's most impressive illusions had nothing to do with special effects or camera tricks. Topol was only 35 years old during filming, yet he needed to convincingly portray a weathered, aging milkman who looked at least 2 decades older. The makeup team had to find a way to add years to his face without making the result look artificial or distracting under the naturalistic cinematography. Every morning, Topol sat through a 2-hour makeup session that included padding to make him appear heavier and prosthetic work to add wrinkles and texture to his skin. But the most unusual detail came directly from the director himself. Jewison allowed makeup artists to visit his trailer each day and clip white hairs from his own beard to apply to Topol's eyebrows. 15 in total, 7 on one side and 8 on the other. That small personal contribution became one of the production's most charming behind-the-scenes stories. Combined with Topol's own acting technique of deliberately locking his muscles to move like an older, more exhausted man, the transformation was remarkably convincing. Audiences had no idea they were watching a man in his mid-30s. Every aching step and tired glance sold the illusion of a lifetime of hard labor and quiet endurance that defined the character completely. Number 8. Fake snow saved the production. When Norman Jewison first scouted locations near Zagreb, Yugoslavia in 1969, the landscape was buried under heavy snow. It was exactly the wintry atmosphere the film needed to sell the harsh conditions of life in a small Jewish village during the early 1900s. Confident the weather would cooperate, the production committed to filming in the same region the following year. But when the cast and crew arrived in 1970, there was almost no snow at all. The bare, muddy fields looked nothing like the frozen landscapes Jewison had envisioned, and the entire visual tone of the movie was suddenly at risk. Without a convincing winter setting, key scenes would lose their emotional weight and the production would have to scramble for an alternative. The emergency solution was as creative as it was unexpected. The production team shipped in massive quantities of marble dust and spread it across the filming locations to simulate snowfall. The fine white powder caught the light convincingly enough to pass for real snow on camera, and most viewers never questioned what they were seeing. It was one of those invisible production saves that audiences take completely for granted, never realizing how close the entire illusion came to falling apart before a single winter scene was ever captured on film. Number 9. Where Tevye looked when he spoke. Some of the film's most powerful moments come from Tevye's quiet personal conversations with God. These scenes required Topol to speak upward toward the sky with genuine emotion, as if addressing someone only he could see. But there was a practical problem that needed solving first. Without a consistent focal point, Topol's eyeline would shift from take to take, and the emotional continuity of those scenes would suffer. Norman Jewison came up with a simple but effective solution. The crew took a stick, attached a piece of white cardboard to it, and drew a Star of David on the surface. This makeshift marker was held just off camera during every scene where Tevye speaks to God, giving Topol a fixed point to direct his gaze toward. The director explained that looking at the symbol helped Topol feel as though he was genuinely addressing a higher power rather than staring into empty sky. The result was a subtle consistency that audiences feel even if they never consciously notice it. Every prayer, every complaint, and every desperate plea carries the same visual anchor, giving those scenes a sense of intimacy and sincerity that a random eyeline could never achieve. It was one of Jewison's quieter directorial choices, but it became one of the most emotionally important decisions in the entire film, grounding Tevye's spiritual life in something real and deeply felt. Number 10. Animals took over the set. Realism was a priority from the very beginning of the shoot, and that meant filling the village of Anatevka with more than just actors. The production brought in 300 extras who spoke various foreign languages to populate the streets, along with flocks of geese, pigs, and their handlers to create the feeling of a working rural settlement. The goal was to make Anatevka feel genuinely lived in rather than staged. But working with that many unpredictable elements came at a cost. Animals wandered through shots unannounced, extras reacted in unscripted ways, and the carefully planned choreography of certain scenes had to be adjusted on the fly. Handlers did their best to manage the livestock, but controlling dozens of live animals on an outdoor set proved nearly impossible at times. The chaos was real and constant, and the production team had to accept it. What could have been a disaster actually became one of the film's greatest strengths. Some of the unscripted animal behavior and spontaneous moments from the extras made it into the final cut, adding a layer of authenticity that no amount of careful staging could replicate. The village felt alive precisely because it was unpredictable. Jewison understood that surrendering a certain degree of control was the price of genuine realism, and the messy, imperfect energy of those scenes gave the movie a warmth and texture that still feels completely natural decades later. Number 11. Perchik was too old on paper. Casting the role of Perchik, the passionate young revolutionary, came with an unexpected problem. Paul Michael Glaser was 27 years old when he read the audition material and immediately worried that he was far too old for a character originally written as a teenager. On paper, the age gap seemed disqualifying, and Glaser himself brought the concern directly to Norman Jewison when they first met to discuss the part. Jewison initially agreed. The director acknowledged that Glaser didn't match the youthful image most people associated with the role from the stage production. But rather than ending the conversation there, Jewison invited him to audition anyway. Something about Glaser's energy and intensity sparked the director's curiosity, and he wanted to see what the actor could do with the material before making a final decision. That instinct paid off enormously. After hearing Glaser read and sending him to Hollywood for a screen test, Jewison offered him the role without hesitation. Glaser brought an intellectual fire and physical presence that redefined Perchik as a more mature, more compelling figure than the stage version had ever presented. Audiences would later know him best as Detective Starsky and Starsky and Hutch, but this film debut proved that the right actor can transform a character far beyond what the script originally intended. Number 12. The role recast without a fuss. Before Paul Michael Glaser ever stepped onto the set, someone else had already been cast as Perchik. Asi Dayan, a well-known Israeli actor and filmmaker, was originally chosen for the role. His background seemed like a perfect fit for the character, and his casting appeared to align with Jewison's broader goal of finding actors with genuine cultural connections to the material being brought to the screen. But once production began, a serious problem emerged. Dayan struggled significantly with the English dialogue, and the language barrier made it difficult for him to deliver the kind of naturalistic performance the film demanded. In a stage production, certain limitations can be masked by distance and energy, but on camera, every hesitation and mispronunciation becomes magnified. The decision was made to replace him quietly during production. The transition happened so smoothly that most people who watched the finished film had no idea a recasting had even taken place. Glaser stepped in and made the role entirely his own, bringing a confidence and fluency that erased any trace of the earlier difficulties. It was one of those behind-the-scenes changes that could have derailed the production if handled poorly, but Jewison managed the situation with enough discretion that audiences never sensed anything had gone wrong at all. Number 13. The pogrom that changed the film. On stage, the darker elements of the story were handled with a certain degree of theatrical restraint. The violence that disrupts Zeitel and Motel's wedding was suggested rather than shown in full, leaving much of the brutality to the audience's imagination. But when it came time to adapt the scene for the screen, Norman Jewison made a deliberate decision to push the film into more unflinching territory. The pogrom sequence in the movie is far more graphic and visceral than anything the stage version ever attempted. Jewison wanted audiences to see the destruction up close, to feel the terror that Jewish communities faced under Imperial Russian rule. The attackers ride into the celebration, smashing property, destroying wedding gifts, and injuring villagers, including Perchik, who tries to fight back and is struck down. The scene doesn't let the audience look away. That choice fundamentally changed the tone of the entire film. By grounding the violence in something raw and visible, Jewison transformed the musical from a nostalgic celebration into something far more historically honest. The joy of the wedding and the horror of the attack happening in the same scene created an emotional contrast that elevated the story beyond entertainment. It reminded audiences that the traditions being celebrated on screen weren't just charming customs, they were survival mechanisms for a people under constant threat. Number 14. The camera trick that won an Oscar. The visual identity of the film is one of its most distinctive features, and it was achieved through a technique that most viewers have never heard of. Cinematographer Oswald Morris wanted the movie to look like a faded painting, something that felt aged and timeless rather than bright and polished. To accomplish this, he stretched a brown silk stocking over the camera lens for the majority of the shoot, softening the light and muting the colors in every frame. The effect was subtle but transformative. Instead of the vivid, saturated look that most musicals of the era favored, the film emerged with a warm, earthy palette that made every scene feel like a memory being recalled rather than an event being watched in real time. Autumn scenes glowed with muted oranges and browns, while winter scenes carried pale blues and grays that felt genuinely cold. The silk stocking filtered everything just enough to remove the sharpness without making the image look blurry. That unconventional approach earned Morris the Academy Award for Best Cinematography, one of the film's 3 Oscar wins. It was a rare case where a single technical decision shaped the entire emotional experience of a movie. Without that stocking over the lens, the film would have looked completely different, and the dreamlike quality that makes it feel so deeply personal and nostalgic simply would not exist. Morris proved that the most powerful visual choices are often the simplest ones. Number 15. Golda's final performance. Behind one of the film's strongest performances was a secret that almost no one on set knew about. Norma Crane, who played Gold with fierce warmth and quiet determination, had been diagnosed with breast cancer before filming even began. She chose to keep her condition private, confiding only in director Norman Jewison, co-star Topol, and associate producer Patrick J. Palmer. The rest of the cast and crew had no idea she was seriously ill. Crane continued working through the entire production without complaint, delivering a performance that anchored some of the film's most emotionally demanding scenes. Her portrayal of Gold, the sharp-tongued but deeply loving wife and mother, required a physical and emotional range that would have challenged any healthy actor. The fact that she managed it while privately battling a life-threatening illness makes her work in the film even more remarkable in hindsight. Tragically, Fiddler on the Roof became Norma Crane's final screen role. She passed away less than 2 years after the film's release at just 44 years old. Her close friend, actress Natalie Wood, reportedly covered her medical and funeral expenses. Crane never sought sympathy or special treatment during the shoot, and her professionalism ensured that the strength audiences see in Gold on screen was earned in ways far deeper than anyone watching could have possibly known at the time. Number 16. Real history shaped every costume. The visual identity of the film didn't come from imagination, it came from history. When production designer Robert F. Boyle began working with Norman Jewison to build the world of Anatevka, he presented the director with a collection of photographs taken by Roman Vishniak in pre-World War II Eastern European shtetls. Jewison was immediately struck by their raw honesty and declared them the production's visual Bible, basing costume, set design, and overall atmosphere directly on those images. The photographs captured a world that had been almost entirely erased by the Holocaust. Wooden synagogues, unpaved village streets, families gathered in worn but dignified clothing. Vishniak's images offered an irreplaceable window into daily Jewish life during the early 20th century. For the design team, this wasn't just reference material, it was a moral obligation. Every texture, every fabric choice, every faded pattern on a headscarf was measured against those photographs to ensure the film honored what had actually existed rather than inventing a Hollywood version of it. That dedication extended all the way to the set construction in Yugoslavia, where the crew rebuilt structures modeled on architectural details from Vishniak's work. The result was a film that didn't just tell a story set in a vanished world, it visually reconstructed one. Audiences watching the movie were seeing something closer to a living document than a typical period piece, and that authenticity is a major reason the film's imagery still feels emotionally powerful more than 50 years later. Number 17. Music written just for the movie. The Broadway score for Fiddler on the Roof was already iconic by the time the film went into production, but simply transplanting those songs onto the screen wouldn't have been enough. Norman Jewison needed someone who could reimagine the music for a cinematic experience, expanding the orchestration, composing new transitional pieces, and tailoring every arrangement to the specific actors performing them. The job went to John Williams, years before he would become the most celebrated film composer in history. Williams didn't just conduct the existing songs. He more than doubled the size of the orchestra, reshaping every number to take full advantage of the film's expanded emotional scope. He composed original music for the opening credits, including a virtuoso solo cadenza that would be performed by one of the world's greatest violinists. He also wrote underscore cues that bridged scenes with a subtlety the stage version never required, giving the film a continuous musical heartbeat that carried audiences through its 3-hour runtime without a single dead moment. That work earned Williams the Academy Award for Best Scoring Adaptation and Original Song Score, the very first Oscar of his career. It was a breakthrough moment for a composer who would go on to score Jaws, Star Wars, Schindler's List, and dozens of other landmark films. But it all started here with a project that demanded he honor someone else's melodies while quietly making them his own. The confidence and skill he demonstrated on this film launched one of the most extraordinary careers in cinema history. Number 18. The violin legend you never see. When audiences watch the film, they see an actor perched on a rooftop, drawing a bow across violin strings with the casual grace of a village musician. That actor is Tuta Lemkau, a Norwegian-born performer who physically embodied the iconic Fiddler with warmth and charm. But the sound audiences hear pouring from that violin doesn't belong to him. Every note of the Fiddler's music was actually performed by Isaac Stern, one of the greatest classical violinists of the 20th century. It was John Williams who suggested bringing Stern onto the project. At the time, Stern was arguably the most famous violinist in the world, renowned for his technical brilliance and deeply expressive playing. He also had personal roots in the story. Born in what is now Ukraine, to a Jewish family that had emigrated when he was an infant, Williams composed an original 4-minute cadenza specifically for Stern to perform over the opening credits, a virtuoso piece designed to match the on-screen Fiddler's movements while showcasing the soloist's extraordinary ability. Stern's playing became the emotional backbone of the entire film. His violin carries the joy of the wedding scenes, the sorrow of the departures, and the quiet resilience of Tevye's conversations with God. Most viewers have no idea that every time the Fiddler appears on screen, they're hearing a musician who had performed at Carnegie Hall, toured the Soviet Union, and recorded some of the most celebrated violin performances of the century. That invisible collaboration between a world-class soloist and a rooftop actor created one of cinema's most unforgettable musical images. Number 19. The director hid in his own film. Norman Jewison couldn't resist sneaking himself into his own movie, but he did it so quietly that most viewers have watched the film dozens of times without ever noticing. His first cameo comes during the Tevye's dream sequence, one of the film's most theatrical and visually striking scenes. When the rabbi's voice rings out singing Mazel Tov during the dream, that voice doesn't belong to any member of the cast. It belongs to Jewison himself, dubbed in during post-production. His second appearance is even harder to spot. During the wedding celebration scene, Jewison slipped into the crowd as an extra, sitting among the guests as if he were just another villager joining the festivities. In a scene packed with hundreds of performers, dancers, and background actors, the director blended in completely. Unless you know exactly where to look, there's no way to pick him out from the surrounding faces. These small hidden moments reveal something important about Jewison's relationship with the material. This wasn't a director standing at a distance from his subject. He was a filmmaker who had immersed himself so deeply in the world of Anatevka that he literally placed himself inside it. For a man who had repeatedly reminded studio executives that he wasn't Jewish, his willingness to step into the frame, even invisibly, suggested that the story had become something deeply personal to him in ways that went far beyond professional obligation. Number 20. I'm Not Jewish shocked the studio. When United Artists approached Norman Jewison to direct the film adaptation, his name alone seemed to confirm what everyone assumed. Jewison, Jewish son. Who better to bring the most beloved Jewish musical of all time to the screen? But when he sat down with studio executives for the first time, his opening words immediately changed the energy in the room. You know, I'm not Jewish, right? The surprise was genuine. The producers had simply never considered the possibility. Rather than seeing it as a problem, the studio decided it might actually be an advantage. They wanted the film to resonate beyond Jewish audiences, to reach viewers of every background with its themes of family, tradition, and displacement. Jewison's outsider perspective, combined with his track record directing films like In the Heat of the Night and The Russians Are Coming, convinced them he could capture the universality of the story without losing its cultural specificity. His sensitivity and respect for the material proved them right. What no one could have predicted was how profoundly the experience would change Jewison personally. Though he never formally converted, the project drew him closer to Jewish life and culture in ways that lasted decades. When he married his second wife in 2010, the couple held a Jewish ceremony, complete with a rabbi and a chuppah. The man who had once sheepishly told a room full of executives that he wasn't Jewish had quietly allowed the story of Tevye and Anatevka to reshape his own life in ways that no one, least of all Jewison himself, ever saw coming. Number 21. Famous names who almost made it. The casting process for the film attracted an extraordinary roster of future stars who auditioned but didn't make the cut. For the role of Perchik alone, a young Robert De Niro read for the part before it eventually went to Paul Michael Glaser. Talia Shire, who would go on to play Adrian in the Rocky films, auditioned to play one of Tevye's daughters. And Katie Sagal, decades before becoming Peggy Bundy on Married with Children, also tried out for the same roles. The competition for the part of Motel the Tailor was equally stacked with future talent. Richard Dreyfuss, just a few years away from starring in Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, auditioned and was turned down. John Ritter, who would later become one of television's biggest comedy stars on Three's Company, also read for Motel. The role ultimately went to Leonard Frey, who had played a smaller part in the original Broadway production and brought a delicate vulnerability that the other actors couldn't quite match. Even the role of Gold saw some remarkable near castings. Norman Jewison initially pursued Anne Bancroft for the part, but she turned it down, reportedly feeling the character was overshadowed by Tevye. Other names considered included Geraldine Page, Colleen Dewhurst, and Claire Bloom. The final decision came down to Norma Crane and Lee Grant, with Crane winning the role that would become her final and most memorable screen performance. Every one of these alternate casting choices would have created an entirely different film. Number 22. Rob Reiner almost played Motel. Among all the near castings in the film's history, one stands out for just how dramatically it could have altered Hollywood trajectories. Rob Reiner, at the time best known as the son of comedy legend Carl Reiner and still years away from his own fame, auditioned for the role of Motel, the shy Ernest Taylor who wins Siedel's hand through quiet persistence. It was a role perfectly suited to Reiner's gentle comedic instincts, and his audition was strong enough to place him among the serious contenders. But the role went to Leonard Frey instead, and the reasoning made sense. Frey had already been part of the original Broadway production, playing Mendel, the rabbi's son, while also serving as an understudy for Motel. He understood the world of the show from the inside out, and his screen test revealed a tender, slightly awkward quality that felt exactly right for a young man too nervous to ask for his beloved's hand in marriage. His performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Had Reiner landed the part, his career might have taken a completely different path. Instead of stepping behind the camera to direct This Is Spinal Tap, Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, and When Harry Met Sally, he might have pursued acting more aggressively. And Frey, without the visibility of a major film role, might never have received the recognition that defined his too-short career. One audition, one decision, and two lives moved in entirely different directions. Number 23. Fedka wasn't the first choice. The role of Fedka, the young Christian man whose love for Chava pushes Tevye to his emotional breaking point, was originally intended for a completely different actor. Norman Jewison's first choice was Richard Thomas, a rising young American performer who would soon become a household name playing John Boy Walton on the long-running television series The Waltons. Thomas seemed like a natural fit, young, earnest, and capable of projecting the quiet decency the character required. But somewhere in the casting process, the decision shifted. The role went instead to Ray Lovelock, an Italian actor who brought a distinctly European quality to the character. Lovelock was already an established presence in European cinema, and though he was also a singer who had released several records in Italy, he curiously did not appear in any of the film's musical numbers. His Fedka operates almost entirely through glances, body language, and a few carefully chosen words rather than through song. The choice to cast a European actor rather than an American one added an unexpected layer of authenticity to the character. Fedka is supposed to feel like someone from a different world than Tevye's daughters, culturally close enough to interact, but fundamentally separated by faith and tradition. Lovelock's slightly foreign screen presence made that distance feel real, in a way that a more familiar American face might not have achieved. It was a subtle casting decision, but one that quietly strengthened one of the film's most emotionally painful storylines. Number 24. No overture was a big risk. In 1971, major musicals released in roadshow format were expected to follow a strict formula. Before the story began, audiences would sit in darkened theaters listening to an orchestral overture, a medley of the show's greatest melodies designed to build anticipation and establish the musical landscape. Films like The Sound of Music, West Side Story, and My Fair Lady all opened this way. Skipping the overture was considered almost unthinkable for a prestige musical production of this scale. Norman Jewison did it anyway. Because the original Broadway production of Fiddler on the Roof had never included a traditional overture, Jewison and his team decided the film shouldn't have one either. Instead, the movie opens with something far more intimate and striking. A lone fiddler perched on a rooftop, playing a haunting solo composed by John Williams and performed by Isaac Stern. The camera holds on this single figure as the music fills the silence, and then Tevye's voice arrives, speaking directly to the audience about tradition. That choice fundamentally reshaped how audiences experienced the film's opening minutes. Rather than being eased into the story through a wash of familiar melodies, viewers were immediately pulled into Tevye's world. The intimacy of that single violin created a personal connection that a full orchestral overture never could have achieved. It was a gamble. Audiences expecting the traditional roadshow experience might have felt disoriented, but the result was one of the most iconic and emotionally effective openings in musical film history. Sometimes the boldest creative decisions are the ones that strip something away rather than add to it. Number 25. The film's quiet global legacy. When the film was released in 1971, it became the highest-grossing movie of the year, earning over $83 million worldwide on a $9 million budget. It received 8 Academy Award nominations and won 3, including Best Cinematography and Best Score Adaptation. But the numbers alone don't capture the way this film traveled across cultures in ways no one had anticipated, resonating with audiences who had no direct connection to Jewish life in Imperial Russia. Nowhere was this more surprising than in Japan, where the film and the stage musical became a cultural phenomenon. Japanese audiences immediately recognized their own experience in Tevye's struggle. The tension between honoring ancestral traditions and adapting to a modernizing world mirrored Japan's own rapid transformation following the Meiji Restoration. A Japanese producer once asked book writer Joseph Stein whether Americans even understood the story, because to him it felt entirely Japanese. The show has been produced in Japan more than 10 times, with one actor performing Tevye over 900 times. That kind of cross-cultural connection is what separates a successful film from a lasting one. Fiddler on the Roof didn't just tell a Jewish story. It told a human story about what happens when the world changes faster than the people living in it. Families in Tokyo, Buenos Aires, Moscow, and Mumbai saw their own fathers, their own daughters, and their own vanishing traditions reflected in the faces on screen. More than 50 years after its release, the film continues to be rediscovered by new generations, each one finding something personal in a story about a milkman, his daughters, and a fiddler balanced on a roof. Every frame of Fiddler on the Roof was earned. Behind the music and the warmth were freezing locations, secret illnesses, mid-production recastings, emergency snow made from marble dust, and a director who almost quit the industry before the project saved him. The film didn't survive on charm alone. It survived because the people who made it refused to cut corners. From hand-stitched period undergarments, no camera would ever see, to a brown silk stocking stretched over a lens to make the whole world look like a memory. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more hidden stories behind the films you love. And let us know in the comments, which of these 25 secrets surprised you the most?